Now, in making decisions on the publications, I understand from what you say is that you're guided by the scriptures.
That is correct.
And that involves, obviously, interpreting the scriptures from time to time.
That is the role of the governing body.
And am I right in understanding that the governing body's interpretation of the scriptures on any particular point might change or develop from time to time?
Yes, it's called new light. That's what they call it. And it's basically when they used to hold a position and then they completely flipped. In the United States, every regulation that exists was paid for in blood. You know, there are regulations with companies that say you can't store plutonium next to the break room, right? If you're working at like a nuclear plant or something. You know why that regulation is there? Because somebody died. They got cancer because somebody at that company was storing plutonium next to a break room. Every regulation was paid for in blood. Every time Jehovah's Witnesses make a change, like the governing body makes a change to their organization like this, people died under the old rule, under the old regime or whatever. And changing it to more closely match what they believe the Bible says, even though they're not even following the Bible really, is just disgusting on so many levels. I mean, they need to change it, right? But they're changing the wrong things. By and large, they only change things that they're legally obligated to change, or they'll go to jail, or they'll be banned from the country. Like they were banned from Russia for being an extremist organization. They were banned as a religion from Norway, I think. They're allowed to practice, but they're not going to be allowed to get government grants or have protection as a religion under the government anymore because of their bad behavior.
That is correct as well.
So I think some examples might be, for example, firstly, the question of blood fractions and whether that is or isn't covered by the prohibition for the receipt of blood transfusions.
This is a perfect example of what I was talking about, their position on blood transfusions, right? Every rule was paid for in blood. People died because they held this position on blood transfusions. They believed that people should not receive blood transfusions. And he talked about blood fractions just now. That gets complicated. Now, the verse that they use to justify their position on blood transfusions is in Leviticus, I believe, and it basically says you're not allowed to eat blood. Now, if you look at the verbiage, the word used in that verse, it says eat. And if you translate it, the original word meant to devour through your mouth and into your stomach. That's what it actually meant, that word. The reason that there was that rule about not eating blood, like in food that you cook, for example, you must drain it properly, is because in Israel, like, you know, the ancient Jews, when they were living their lives or whatever, their rabbis were also the doctors. And they tried to limit things that spread disease. That's also why you're not allowed to eat pork. Because pork, if it's not cooked properly, will cause disturbing problems for you. Disturbing problems. Like parasites and stuff. So they prohibited eating blood. It was important to drain the meat properly before eating it, right? And blood, as we know, is full of pathogens. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses reinterpreted that position, that verse, to mean you're not allowed to take a life-saving medical treatment if you need it. That's very different from not eating blood. At no point in the entire Bible did God ever actually demand a human sacrifice. And that's what that is, human sacrifice. You are required to give your life for God. Now, there are actually 3 examples of human sacrifice in the Bible. So I guess it's not fair to say there are no examples, but it wasn't a regular part of worship, which is what Jehovah's Witnesses have turned it into. The 3 examples of human sacrifice in the Bible were Jesus, although that's arguable. And then there's Isaac and Abraham, right? Abraham was told to sacrifice his son, and then God called it off at the last second. So, again, arguable. And then the third one was a guy named Jephthah. He said, God, if you help me win this war against whoever he's fighting, the Midianites maybe, I will sacrifice the first thing that comes out to greet me when I come home from the war. And he was thinking, it's going to be the dog. Like, I don't give a fuck about the dog. Just, let him die, whatever. It turned out to be his daughter. And his daughter went into the mountains, before she died for months to kind of enjoy life, apparently. And, and then she was sacrificed to God. Those are the only examples of human sacrifice in the Bible. Now, as a regular part of worship, human sacrifice was never required. But that's what's happening right now. They're requiring human sacrifice. And they even put, Jehovah's Witnesses, they put a little thing in there, in their watchtowers back in the day, that basically showed all of the loyal worshipers of Jehovah who gave their lives in service of God by not taking a blood transfusion and dying. They realized how deeply, tacky isn't even the right word for it, is it? How grotesque and morbid it was to list people who sacrificed their lives for the organization, and they stopped doing that after a while. We don't know exactly how many people have died from this. We know it's in the thousands, many, many thousands, simply because of the awakes and watchtowers that they released with the people's names. Like back in the 80s, I think. Anyways, the guy mentioned blood fractions a minute ago, so Jehovah's Witnesses are strictly forbidden from taking blood transfusions in the event they need it. But taking blood fractions, like medicines that were derived from blood, like people withdrew plasma from others and studied it and created medicines out of it, that's a conscience matter, they say. We're warning you. You may not make it to heaven if you choose, or you may not make it to the paradise if you choose to take this medicine based on blood fractions, but we don't know for sure, so we're leaving it up to you. That's basically what was said. That's why he's bringing up blood fractions here. So let's continue listening now that you have that context.
For example, firstly, the question of blood fractions and whether that is or isn't covered by the prohibition for the receipt of blood transfusions.
I find it fascinating that they say it's a conscience matter, taking medicine derived from blood fractions or whatever, when they're supposed to be able to talk to God, right? Why don't they just ask God? I don't understand. It's so weird. Can you talk to God or not, right?
That is correct as well, but if I could just mention, when blood transfusions were first introduced, there wasn't a lot of options with regard to blood fractions.
Yes, but my point is, or what I'm seeking to understand, is there was an interpretation at one point which said that members of the Jehovah's Witnesses should not receive blood fractions, but in more recent times it's been accepted, as I understand it, that there's no specific scriptural direction on that, so on blood fractions, that is, so that's a matter for the individual conscience of Jehovah's Witnesses.
That's correct, but they speak to Jehovah. Can't they just get this information directly from him? And also, there's no scriptural direction on blood transfusions either. Needles didn't even exist back then. Hypodermic needles didn't exist at the time. So why are they confident enough to let thousands of people die, tens, hundreds of thousands of people die, over something that is very obviously not in the Bible, but they're more hesitant when it comes to blood fractions? Like, give me a break.
That's right. And Mr. Stewart, if I may mention, this is an example of the desire of the governing body not to go beyond the scriptures. Clearly, we have the direction in Acts chapter 15, 28 and 29 against blood. But if I could also mention, you see, as with anything in the community, more and more knowledge becomes available medically. It can be very overwhelming trying to see all the latest medical research and so on. But the governing body tries to make sure that they don't go beyond what is written. If we see that a direction from the scriptures has perhaps been used too broadly, then we're the first ones to try to correct that.
No, they aren't. They're not the first ones to try to correct it. They have never tried to correct their garbage. Usually when new light comes out, quote unquote, new light, Jehovah is expanding the information so they know more. Usually when that happens, God, I can't talk while I'm deflecting a laser. Usually when that happens, it's making things even worse, more regressive. Why do they even have to do this in the first place? Why can't they just allow people to get blood transfusions? Like, what's the big deal? I don't understand. Why do they care? It said eating blood was wrong, not getting blood injected into you through a hypodermic needle to save your life. God in the Bible, or the Christian God, the one represented by Jesus, valued life over everything. Everything. What makes them think that they're right about this? It does not make any sense. See, I'm talking again. That's why I can't deflect. It doesn't make any sense at all.
And I take it too that the state of knowledge about the scriptures, and in particular historical knowledge about scriptures, also improves or increases from time to time.
Did you see that shit? That was fucking metal. I just deflected both blasts simultaneously. That was crazy. Wow. Okay. That's awesome. I'm really proud of that.
Historical knowledge about scriptures also improves or increases from time to time.
Right. Historical knowledge about scriptures increases and improves over time, and that makes the picture clearer. I thought they talked to God. I thought God sent them messages directly into their brain. What happened to that?
That is correct. But there are some basic things in the Bible that have not changed right from the beginnings of the Jehovah's Witness religion. And I won't take your time, obviously, going through those, but it is important to realize what are basic things in the Bible. For example, is the Bible from God? That there is no possibility of us changing our viewpoint on that.
Mr. Jackson, you probably know that we discussed with some of your members earlier in this hearing the relationship of the Bible being written at a time of particular political and social structure and its literal relevance in today's social and political context. Are you familiar with those discussions?
I am. I did hear your question, Your Honour, and I at the time was quite frustrated that I didn't have an opportunity to answer. So I appear this opportunity is now coming.
I'm going to give you an opportunity. Now, it is plain that over time, in relation to matters of relevance to this commission, our understanding, both medical, social and of the political issues that arise, has changed. And you're aware of that?
I am aware of that, Your Honour.
That's really interesting. So basically the judge, I guess is who this is saying the Bible was written during a time of very specific political strife with specific political things going on, and thus put emphasis on specific political positions that were relevant at that time. Like I said with the rabbis, right? The context behind not eating blood was the rabbis were the doctors, and blood carried pathogen at the time. Still does, but we can filter that out pretty well now. So the best they could do was say, don't eat blood or you risk spreading pathogens. That's a very specific context in which you shouldn't be eating blood. That context is gone now because we have like scanning equipment and tests, and it saves thousands of people's lives, tens or hundreds of thousands every year. I don't have any idea how many people it saves every year worldwide, but a lot anyway. That's a really interesting point by the judge, and a point that goes right over the head of the governing body members. They don't even care. The political context at the time it was written is irrelevant.